To set up an ambush, 4 Curtiss P-40 Warhawks dove 10,000 feet over the coast of New Guinea. Their target was a silver-gray Aichi D-3 Type 99 Val dive bomber. First Lieutenant Donald S. Lee, Jr., the flight leader, locked the Japanese aircraft in his gun sight and fired a long burst of .50 caliber rounds. At that moment, he felt a strong impact. His plane had been hit in the radiator by a 7.7 millimeter round from the Val's rear gunner. Lee veered away and watched as the engine temperature began to rise rapidly. His wingman later said he saw a thin white mist trailing from the damaged Warhawk, showing that the coolant was leaking fast. Lee realized his aircraft would not make it back. At just 23 years old, Lee calmly considered his odds of surviving in the perilous waters off Cape Ward Hunt. The risks were high. Even if he survived the jump, there were enemy patrol boats and dangerous sharks in the area. There was no guarantee a friendly rescue team would reach him in time. As he unbuckled his safety harness and climbed onto the wing, he tried to push those thoughts aside. But the plane suddenly rolled, slamming him into the rudder and sending him falling toward the sea, only 800 feet below. In the history of the 49th Fighter Group of the United States Army Air Forces, this event on July 14, 1943, was just a small footnote. The Fighting 49ers had been deployed quickly to defend Australia and New Guinea, facing experienced Japanese pilots flying fast, deadly aircraft in a rugged theater of war. Over 3 years, the 49th Fighter Group claimed 668 enemy aircraft shot down. The group included notable pilots like Colonel Gerald R. Johnson, who scored all 22 of his kills with them, and Major Richard the Furbong, America's top ace with 40 victories, 21 of which he earned while flying with the unit. But beyond the famous names, many brave pilots flew difficult missions with worn-out planes over hostile land. One of them was Lieutenant Donald Lee. He served 18 grueling months with the 49th Fighter Group before he was forced to crash land off New Guinea's northern coast. Lee flew more than 600 combat hours in the P-40 Warhawk. He had been part of the action from the start, when skilled Japanese pilots flying the Mitsubishi Zero clashed with inexperienced American pilots over the Australian port of Darwin. Throughout his service, Lee played a crucial role in helping General Douglas MacArthur's forces by intercepting Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers, strafing enemy troops, and escorting countless Allied supply planes. During that time, he won 4 air-to-air combat victories. His story is filled with courage, perseverance, and both fortune and misfortune. Donald Harwood Lee Jr. was born on June 29, 1920 in Ypsilanti, Michigan, to Donald and Hazel Estelle Lee. After graduating from Ypsilanti High School in 1938, he studied architecture for 2 years at the University of Michigan. But his life took a different path. Like many young men of his time, Don dreamed of flying. The Aviation Cadet Training Program offered a 7-month course for young men with 2 years of college and who passed strict physical tests. Though many washed out, those who succeeded were commissioned as second lieutenants in the Army Air Corps, which became the Army Air Forces in June 1941 and received their pilot wings. For Lee, a smart and athletic man from a town with limited opportunities, the idea of joining the cadet program was appealing. Everyone who followed the news knew that the United States was heading toward war. On April 28, 1941, he enlisted in the Army in Detroit, Michigan. Don received advanced flight training on the North American AT-6A Texan, a 2-seat trainer, at Ellington Field near Houston, Texas. He practiced night flying, air navigation, and formation maneuvers under the guidance of USAAF instructors. On October 28th, he ground-looped an AT-6A after a rough landing that caused the aircraft to dig a wing into the grass and spin. Despite this mishap, he earned his pilot wings. Just 4 days after the United States declared war on Japan, on December 12, 1941, Second Lieutenant Donald Lee graduated from flight school and was commissioned into the U.S. Army Air Forces. But there was no time to celebrate. He was quickly sent to Morrison Field near West Palm Beach, Florida. He reported there on December 21st and was assigned to the 7th Pursuit Squadron, one of 3 squadrons in the 49th Pursuit Group. The others were the 8th and 9th Pursuit Squadrons. When the unit received deployment orders on December 26th, the rumors about going overseas turned out to be true. The chaos that followed must have left Lee and his fellow squadron members feeling confused and unsettled. The 49ers quickly gathered all their equipment and personal belongings and boarded a troop train that departed West Palm Beach at 11:45 p.m. 4 days later, on January 4, 1942, they arrived in San Francisco, where they were housed in a former cattle pavilion known as the Cow Palace. Along with the aviators, dozens of commanders, and over 500 support personnel, including mechanics, clerks, electricians, cooks, and others joined the 49th Pursuit Group to keep operations running while they waited for their transport to arrive. On January 12th, the airmen began boarding the SS Mariposa, a former luxury liner, to travel to an undisclosed location. It wasn't until the ship passed under the Golden Gate Bridge that authorities revealed their destination, Australia. Although the 49th was the first American pursuit group to deploy overseas after Pearl Harbor, their departure reflected the country's lack of preparedness for war. No one knew which aircraft they would be flying once they arrived. Of the 102 pilots in the group, including Lee, 95 had never flown a fighter plane before. The Mariposa arrived in Melbourne, Australia on February 1st after nearly 3 weeks at sea, and the next day, Lee and the others disembarked. Within a week, the 7th Pursuit Squadron moved into a training base in Bankstown, New South Wales. While stationed there, the airmen focused on learning to operate their new aircraft, which were recently built P-40 Warhawk fighters. At the time, the P-40 was the most advanced and widely available American fighter. It was a single-seat, low-wing, all-metal interceptor powered by a 1,150-horsepower Allison V1710-39 inline engine, capable of reaching speeds over 360 miles per hour. The Warhawk was equipped with 6 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns and could carry either a drop tank or a 500-pound bomb. During this period of training, many planes were damaged. Several rookie pilots veered off runways during takeoff due to the strong torque from the Warhawk's engine. The plane's narrow landing gear often caused it to ground loop, and its liquid-cooled engine frequently overheated, similar to what had happened to Don Lee back in Texas. As the pilots learned to handle these difficult aircraft, the squadron experienced more than 60 accidents, many of which were fatal. While Lee and his fellow airmen were adjusting to their new planes, the enemy continued to push closer to Australia. By February 1942, American and Filipino pilots had lost control of the skies over the Philippines to Japanese forces. Next in line was the Netherlands East Indies, where outnumbered Dutch, British, and American aircraft faced off against highly skilled Japanese Zero pilots over the island of Java. The last natural barrier between Australia and the advancing Japanese was Papua New Guinea, which lay just to the north. Before launching an amphibious invasion, Japanese bombers targeted Port Moresby, Papua's capital. On February 3rd and again on February 19th, large-scale airstrikes hit the Allies' forward base in Darwin, Northern Territory, Australia. During the latter, 242 Japanese Navy aircraft from carriers and land bases destroyed airfields and port infrastructure with minimal resistance from American interceptors and Australian anti-aircraft gunners. The 49ers were urgently needed to stop Japan's next move, regardless of their readiness. On March 4th, the 7th Pursuit Squadron flew 12 aircraft 3,000 miles north from their base in Bankstown to Horn Island, Queensland. Don Lee was among those who took off at dawn on March 7th for this long relocation. He made it as far as the Charters Towers Royal Australian Air Force Airfield, where his P-40, serial number 41-5313, sustained serious damage. After local officers helped repair it, Lee flew the aircraft, now nicknamed Hawk, to Darwin later in March. By that time, American forces had already begun evacuating critical personnel from the Philippines and the Netherlands East Indies. On March 17th, a tired but determined General Douglas MacArthur arrived in Australia with orders to build up defenses and plan a return to the Philippines. That same day, a group of battle-hardened veterans arrived to strengthen the ranks of the 49ers. These 12 pilots, survivors of the 17th Pursuit Squadron based in Java, had escaped the doomed outpost. Among them was Captain Boyd D. Buzz Wagner, the first American ace of World War II, who was promoted to Deputy Group Commander. Another was Lieutenant William J. Hennon, who had 5 confirmed kills. Hennon painted an image of the bunyip, a fearsome creature from Aboriginal folklore, on the tail of his Warhawk, which later inspired the unit's new nickname when it was officially renamed the 7th Fighter Squadron on May 15th. This terrifying image quickly became the squadron's emblem. In April, the 7th Fighter Squadron regrouped at Bachelor Field near Darwin to provide critical air defense for this strategic location. Although Lee frequently flew patrols with his squadron, he had not yet encountered the G-4M Betty bombers and their A-6M0 escorts, which regularly carried out raids in Australia. That changed on July 30th, when reports from coast watchers alerted American forces to a large enemy formation heading toward Port Darwin. In response, 46 P-40 Warhawks were scrambled. Lee, flying his plane Hawk at 25,000 feet over the port as wingman to Lieutenant Ray Malikian of X-Flight, spotted 9 Betty bombers coming directly toward them. Closely following Malikian, Lee dove into a head-on attack. He later recounted that the enemy opened fire as they approached. One P-40E was shot down during the engagement, and the attacking Zeros scattered the American planes. Second Lieutenant Gene Drake of X-Flight had to ditch his Warhawk off Waggate Beach. One enemy bomber may have been hit, but Lee didn't score in this first encounter, which lasted only 90 seconds. 3 weeks later, he would meet the enemy again with greater success. On August 23rd, the Japanese Navy launched what would become its final attack on Darwin, sending 27 G-4M bombers with an escort of 15 A-6M0s. The 7th Fighter Squadron, known as the Screaming Demons, was ready. Lee and Malikian again flew together, diving through the formation of bombers to engage the escort fighters that had arrived late. Lee became separated from the rest of his group during the fight and started to return home. On the way, he spotted an unsuspecting Zero and launched a successful attack. General MacArthur's headquarters later described the August 26th mission as a brilliant tactical interception. The squadron claimed 7 Japanese aircraft downed that day, with the loss of just 1 P-40. By this point, Lee and the other Screaming Demons had become a skilled and deadly combat unit. But as enemy raids on Darwin subsided, their talents were required elsewhere. The squadron was assigned as the aerial spearhead of Allied counterattacks in New Guinea, now operating under General George C. Kenney's 5th Air Force. On September 14th, the 7th Fighter Squadron completed a 1,100-mile journey across the sea to reach an airstrip known as 14-Mile Drome, named for its distance from Port Moresby. General Kenney recalled the extremely basic conditions there, including swarms of mosquitoes and flies, stifling heat, and choking dust. At 14 Mile, Lee gave up his dependable but worn Hawk for a newer P-40E, serial number 41-25553, which he named Pissed Off. The name may have reflected his frustration with the harsh environment or the missions he was assigned. By September, Australian ground troops had halted the Japanese advance on Port Moresby and had begun a slow offensive up the Kokoda Track toward Japanese bases on New Guinea's northern coast. During this phase, Lee and his squadron supported the Australian troops with numerous ground attack missions. These missions were crucial, though less glamorous, and flying with 500-pound bombs under their aircraft left little room for dogfighting with enemy planes. Lee was promoted to first lieutenant on October 16th, and that same month the base received new P-40K fighters, which offered 150 more horsepower than the E model. Although he would have to wait several months to get one, Lee was eager to upgrade. Meanwhile, the 7th Fighter Squadron began escorting fighter bombers targeting Japanese strongholds along the northern New Guinea coast. On November 30th, a large formation of A-6Ms attempting to defend against an American strike clashed with 16 screaming demons near Buna. Now a section leader in green flight, Lee watched as enemy fighters dived out of cloud cover to attack. He later described how 2 Zeros attacked their flight from behind at around 7,000 feet. Following his lead pilot into a dive, Lee ended up on the tail of another Zero. As the enemy aircraft pulled up in a stall turn, Lee fired a burst. The Zero burst into flames, flipped over, and crashed to the ground after Lee fired another round. With the new year came a shift in enemy forces and a relocation to support Japanese Army troops now in the region. In January 1943, aircraft from the Imperial Japanese Army began appearing over New Guinea. Their Nakajima Ki-43 Oscars, which were often mistaken for Navy Zeros, were agile and dangerous when flown by experienced pilots. In February, the 7th Fighter Squadron began operating out of a new airfield at Dobodura, near Buna, to continue their missions. Even though the airstrip at Dobo was muddy and crawling with scorpions, it provided a few long-forgotten comforts that brought a sense of normalcy back into the lives of the soldiers stationed there. They enjoyed the rare luxury of a regular mail service, nightly movie screenings, a baseball diamond for recreation, and even hot American-style meals. Still, not everything was perfect. Christmas parcels from home didn't arrive until May 7th. It was that spring when Don Lee finally received his most awaited gift, a brand new P-40K 1CU Warhawk, serial number 4245979. True to tradition, he named this new plane Pissed Off, continuing the legacy of his earlier aircraft. On March 5th, Lee put his new fighter to work. He was flying escort alongside RAF Bristol Beaufighters on a strafing run targeting the Japanese airfield at Malahong, northeast of Leh. During the mission, he and fellow pilots Second Lieutenant Dave Baker and Captain Ray Malikian engaged 2 enemy Nakajima Ki-43s, also known as Oscars, as they attempted to retreat into the safety of the clouds. As the action unfolded, another Oscar crossed Lee's path slightly below him, moving from left to right. According to his later writings, he closed in on the enemy plane as it edged toward the clouds. Pulling back into a tight loop, Lee opened fire. The plane burst into flames at the wing roots on either side of the fuselage, and 2 large chunks tore off at the top of the loop, confirming his 3rd verified aerial victory. As summer approached, the squadron settled fully into their new base at Dobodura, taking on a heavy load of transport, escort, and bombing missions. But flying wasn't the only danger Lee faced. On May 10th, while attempting to deliver repair parts to a radar station at Oro Bay, he crashed an Australian-built Tiger Moth trainer, referred to by American airmen as a PT-24. The crash occurred after the small aircraft hit several hidden oil drums at the end of the runway. Miraculously, both Lee and his passenger emerged unharmed. Now leading Orange Flight, Lee took off at 7:30 a.m. on July 14th to escort a group of C-47 transport planes to a camp near Salamaua. During the flight, 2 Japanese dive bombers were spotted just offshore. 14 U.S. fighters under Ray Malikian's command, flying high at 21,000 feet, swooped in. After Blue Flight chased one of the bombers into a cloud bank, Orange Flight, with Don Lee at the helm, dove in for the second. Maneuvering skillfully behind the damaged aircraft, Lee fired a deadly burst of machine gun fire, igniting the enemy bomber. But the enemy wasn't finished. The gunner on the Japanese aircraft managed to get off a lucky shot, piercing the coolant system of Lee's Warhawk. Realizing the severity of the damage, Lee radioed a distress call and aimed for Lasanga Island, a small Allied-held territory off the coast of New Guinea. At just 800 feet, Lee was forced to bail out. During the rapid exit, the tail of the aircraft struck him, shattering his left arm. Despite the injury, he managed to deploy his parachute. Upon hitting the water, Lee discovered both his inflatable raft and his Mae West life jacket had failed. Struggling to stay afloat, he became increasingly vulnerable. Fellow pilots tried to throw him their own life rafts, and Ray Malikian circled overhead organizing rescue efforts. Wingman Lucius LaCroix watched helplessly as sharks began to circle the wounded airmen. With fuel running dangerously low, LaCroix and the others were eventually forced to return to base after making 2 attempts to strafe the predators. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, 2 Douglas A-20 Havoc light bombers appeared overhead. They accurately dropped a large life raft directly to Lee. 30 minutes later, the crew of the American patrol torpedo boat PT-50 arrived and rescued him from the water. Lee was taken back to Dobodura for medical treatment. There, he was promoted to captain and reassigned to Group Headquarters. In a ceremony held on August 25th, he was awarded the Purple Heart for the wounds he sustained during the mission. Following the end of his tour, Lee returned home for rest and to attend command school. In September 1944, now a major, he returned to the Southwest Pacific. On the 15th of that month, he assumed command of the 67th Fighter Squadron, familiarly known as the Fighting Cocks, a well-known unit under the 13th Air Force stationed in the Philippines. Although he saw intense action with the 67th, Lee never downed another enemy aircraft. With 4 confirmed kills by the end of the war, he missed the official designation of ace by a single victory. Lee continued to serve his country as a reserve officer in the U.S. Air Force. During the Korean War, he was recalled to duty, flying North American F-86 Sabre jets into combat. Over his distinguished career, he earned numerous military honors, including the Bronze Star Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Purple Heart, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. He eventually retired with the rank of lieutenant colonel. In civilian life, Don Lee pursued a career in the insurance industry. He also built a family, raising 5 children and becoming the proud grandfather of 13. On February 20th, 2011, Donald H. Lee Jr. passed away in Edmond, Oklahoma at the age of 90.